Hello and welcome back, and I'm going to continue with the exploration of deep water mathematics. And in the last few days, or rather in the last couple of weeks, we went over some equations for the physical, vital and mental. And today I want to explore an equation for the integral. Now we're going to use the same approach as we had used earlier to identify first the four buckets. So bucket one was basically looking at the nature of a point, and really here what we have is we have miracle that's embedded in each point in space, and we had identified the components of this miracle by identifying four different equations earlier on: an equation for omnipresence, an equation for omnipotence, an equation for omniscience, and an equation for omniloving. What we subsequently went on to do was to translate this miracle in a point into a set of architectural forces. And so we came up with four sets: a set for omnipresence, a set for omnipower, a set for omniscience, a set for omniloving. And this basically contained a set of architectural forces that set the parameters or by which development of organizations can take place. Now there was a further translation that took place, or we hypothesized a further translation where you have a particular set of these architectural forces that combine to create uniqueness in any kind of organization. So it could be uniqueness in a person, a uniqueness in a team, a uniqueness in a company, a uniqueness in a country, a uniqueness in any kind of system. And we created a few different equations to capture this uniqueness, and we call them the signature, the equation for a signature and the equation for culture. Subsequently, we went through a third translation, and in that translation we identified the initial points of view or orientations with which we perceive the world, or by which we recognize similar patterns that are occurring across the world. And these were the physical, vital, mental, integral, and so on. Now, when we think about the four buckets, we have therefore a bucket for this outer orientation, and what we've done already in the last 10 days or so is create equations for this outer orientation, the physical, vital, mental, and today we're going to focus on the integral. And we have a second bucket that we refer to as meta level 1 that really contains or identifies the essence of an organization which we're perceiving. A third one, again, meta level 2, that identifies a set of architectural forces, and a fourth bucket, meta level 3, that looks at the nature of miracle in each point. Now when we think about the equation, or we begin to construct the equation for the integral, what therefore we consider are components from each of these buckets. So we have at meta level 3, we have an equation for the aspect of omniloving, and I'm going to modify this slightly from what we had identified earlier based on some further introspection. But what we have for omniloving is we had hypothesized that across any time-space continuum from 0 to n, and time-space continuum here refers to the causal wedges with which we first began our initial exploration of deep water. So in any time-space continuum from 0 to n, we have an action such that there's a shift from a basis of any kind of negative orientation, physical, vital, mental, negative orientation, to a positive orientation, physical, vital, mental, positive orientation, and so on. And this can only occur, we hypothesized, if there is a reality of love. But I further want to qualify this equation by saying that basically what we're saying is that there is an action of this nature, so that from a basis of negativity that might be here, we're moving to a basis of increased positivity in orientations and the combinations and integrations And therefore, this being a behavior that we perceive in polar coordinates, I would say that this function here would be modulated by this polar system r theta, where you have r being the distance from the origin and theta being the angle, the angular momentum, which creates the different circles and therefore broader and broader basis of integration. So I would modify our initial equation of quote-unquote love so that there's the action of r and theta such that there's a broader and broader basis of integration and unification that takes place. Now looking at meta level 2, what we had here was a set of omni-loving, and if you recall, this had architectural forces of the nature of love, compassion, harmony, relationship, and so on. And when we think about meta level 1, which is basically the essence of any organization, and therefore is that unique combination of architectural forces that create the uniqueness of an organization, the way that we had identified the equation or typified the equation was by general function sig, and here I'm going to say sig with a base I for integrality, and that's equal to some element, primary element x with a relative weight a, and a secondary element b, y with a relative weight b, and this secondary aspect can repeat itself from 0 to n times with the different y's and different b's, such that x is an element from this set of omni-loving, and y is an element from any of the sets, so omni-loving, omnipresence, omnipower, omniscience. So y can be a repeating or a secondary element that can occur any number of times, and it can be a different element from each of the sets. And a and b are integers such that a is always greater than b. So therefore saying that x, the primary element which is derived from the set of omni-loving, is the primary element, and you can have secondary elements of lesser weight from any of the sets, including from omni-loving. Finally, when we think about the outer, then what we have is this notion of integrality, and this is a set which has characteristics such as being able to see things from multiple points of view, so multiple points of view, being able to penetrate into the essence of any point of view, the ability to synthesize, the ability to shift from one point of view to the other, and so on. And what we're further hypothesized as we looked at an equation for the physical, vital, mental is that there is some kind of a function, and we call it a transformation circle, which has 4 layers, if you will. It's like a seed, and at the very inner or deepest aspect there's the meta level 3. This is surrounded by meta level 2, surrounded by meta level 1, and surrounded by the outer. And we hypothesize that over time there's an action such that the sole focus on the outer begins to change as more and more of the inner integrates or incarnates into the outer. And finally what we have is an integration across the different layers from the outer meta level 1, meta level 2, meta level 3, and we had represented this transformation circle function by the notation transformation circle TC, and suggested that this is modulated by the sinusoidal function or wave that cuts across each of the layers, plus some kind of constant E, which indicates the growing nature of this sinusoidal function, and yet bounded within the circle, so pi. And so what we have finally as an equation, a quote-unquote equation for this integrality, if you will, is these four meta-level components, quote-unquote multiplied by this transformation circle that is modulated by sine, E, and pi. And so that gives us the final equation for integrality.